what happens, or at least at that time, what it was like to direct a first film, because it actually was not the first film that I directed. I'll explain that too. It was Bloodrage was directed both before Abduction and after Abduction. Now, that's something no one has ever asked me. Thank you very much. And no one has ever asked me about Abduction either. You know what? Let me say this. Early films like that, like Abduction or Bloodrage, which I don't even consider my film. I didn't take my name on it, but people always ask me about it. Those are the training ground and the entree to a business that a lot of people go through. And let me explain what that feels like to someone who gets an opportunity to direct. See, right now, the way things are in the world that you live in and I still live in, it's not difficult to make a film. Anybody can make a film, with their phone, and they can make a film with their cell phone. And you don't need a full crew and someone to give you a lot of money and responsibility for how it's going to get out there and get that money back. Yes, of course, there are people doing first films that are tremendous films, but there's so many people who are able to do a first film without a lot of stress of getting the opportunity. So back then, because you have to remember, when I was starting in film, is the same time guys like Marty Scorsese were starting, guys like Francis Coppola were starting, because we were all starting back around the same years, early years. And it was a big deal to have an opportunity to make any kind of film, because someone had to say, all right, here's the money, hire a crew, get all that equipment, get those trucks, get the, actors, work with the, all of those things that you need to work with. Have unions coming, either after you or with you, to work these things out. Now it's a lot easier to make early films. So, all of us back then, and I'm not trying to duck your question, I'm going to deal with your question very directly. Absolutely. But all of us back then had to struggle with what it is that we would have to do or want to do to get into this business. Now, I've been in the business all my life, all right? And it's a wonderful thing if you get the chance to be in this business, as you know. It's a terrific thing if you get the opportunity. But it was much more difficult to get your first production. So people think about all kinds of things. I mean, everyone who's faced with that has to think, well, I have an opportunity to make a movie. Do I want to make that movie? Is it someone else's idea? Is it your idea? Why do you want to make that movie? Every director has to wrestle with that. Do you want to express something internal, that you just feel needs expressing? And, there's a lot of ego issues, because what makes you think that what you want to say, lots of people want to listen to? So, you have to decide what it is. Are you trying to speak to specific people? Are you trying to speak to everyone? Are you trying to speak to, your mom and make her proud of you? Or maybe be a popular guy, or is it about getting into a business where you think you're going to be famous or rich or something like that? So you got to figure out your motivation back then. But the overriding thing is that if you have an opportunity to learn how to make film, because you can't experiment the same way you can experiment now, again, like I say, with your cell phone, and make a bunch of films and put them up on the platforms that are available. Then if you had an opportunity to make a movie, that was a big deal that might not come again. So I consider Abduction and even Bloodrage as kind of a training for making the Prowler, which I think is my first film. I think of that way. But no, you have to, one thing about making movies, you do have to be responsible for what you do, and you can't duck it. I mean, if you're willing to go ahead and say, come watch what I did, you have to listen to all the bad opinions you might hear about that. And you have to have a good sense of that. people sometimes say, you must feel terrible. You got this bad review from a critic on Friday the 13th, let's say. Do you think for 1 minute when you start out to make a Friday the 13th movie, you don't think you're going to get bad reviews from critics? Of course you do. You're not making it to try to get the good review from them. You're making it for whatever other reasons you're making it for, to express yourself, to reach an audience, to get entree to the business, whatever it is. So back to your question about first film, I need to talk about Bloodrage, because at the time, I was struggling to get into the business. I didn't have any connections in the business. I didn't have personal money, family money that was going to back me. I had to hustle around, and if I went to the dentist, I had to ask him to invest in my movie, while he's filling my teeth. Every place you go, you have to try to somehow get an opportunity to make film. So I had an editorial business back then. Now, I've never been an editor, but it was a way I could be in the business and be around film. I had editors who worked at this service, a little service that I had. And, we'd cut trailers and TV spots and radio spots back then. And everything was done on film. This is before we were working on video of any kind. So you'd cut that stuff. And I became a film doctor. Now, you've heard that phrase maybe from other people before. But what a film doctor does is you take an existing film and you shoot some scenes maybe, or you just re-edit it, you put new music, or you reshoot half the film, or more than that, and you create a new version of that film, maybe with a new title and new ads and everything else. So going back to Bloodrage, I really wanted to be a documentary filmmaker. I never really thought about doing features. I thought about doing documentaries. And I knew so little about film. I went through phone numbers that I got from, the Yellow Pages, which was the directory you used back then before the internet, a big book with a lot of numbers in it, and called film companies. And I thought, well, maybe I can talk someone into giving me a documentary to do, because I wanted to do a documentary. Back then, famous writer Norman Mailer was running for mayor in New York City. It was sort of not a serious campaign, but an opportunity for him to express himself. And I thought documenting this in a film might be interesting. So I went around trying to get that financed, never succeeded in getting it financed. Shot little bits and pieces as I had small amounts of money anyway, never finished it. But in the process of going around, I met someone who said, would you like to do a feature? And I thought, wow, I never expected to hear those words. So I said yes. We started to construct a film, which is the beginning of the Bloodrage story. We started to construct a film, and I made all the mistakes that are easy to make, I think, excusing myself, but stupid to make also. So I made the most pretentious, self-indulgent film that I thought was artistic, and nobody else agreed. That I thought, was going to be just really, really an introspective film. I was influenced by, those Marty Scorsese New York street things like, Mean Streets and things like that.
Right. Yeah.
And I made a film, and when I finished it, it was about the psychological decomposition of this guy in a crappy room in Times Square and his life around that. It was boring. It was absolutely worthless. It was not inexpensive. Back then it cost, I think it cost maybe $150,000, which you have to put into those times was a lot to spend and was a lot to lose. Fortunately, the guy who gave me the money had plenty of money and a good sense of all of this, and it was okay. So many years later, after I made Abduction. And I was a film doctor, remember, fixing other people's films that didn't work. I decided to try to fix my own film that didn't work. So this must have been, I don't know, 7 years after I shot the first part of Bloodrage. I had ideas to make him more demented and make him a killer, a serial killer, and shot all of that footage at that time and married both things and made one film. The actors aged 7 years. I don't know if you notice it, but you know, we brought them back, we cut their hair, we made them look the same as much as we could. We matched the wardrobe, we matched the lighting style. We made it look like one complete film. I never considered it my film anymore, you know, because for me, it wasn't. It was two different things. It was a doctor job on a pretentious thing I did a long time ago. So that's what Bloodrage is, and that's why I didn't take my name on Bloodrage as a director, because I didn't think of it as something that I didn't want to think of it that way. I wasn't hiding. I just didn't want to think of it as a first film that I directed. But in fact, technically, it is. And every once in a while, you know, because I own it partially. It's another very long story. I don't know if you want to hear all these things, but I own the deal I made. I financed the second half. I didn't finance the first part. I financed the second half. I went to the original producer and said, I'm going to try to raise the money to do additional shooting, and then we can maybe get some money back from what you spent before, you know? So we split the world rights, and I took all foreign rights, and he took US and Canada, something else. And I took all foreign. So when we had Bloodrage, I took it around to foreign markets like the Cannes Film Festival. And that day, in those days, there was Milan Film Festival, MIFED. These are markets, not just film festivals for movie stars on red carpet. They're for small films, independent films, to get sold. Hang on a second. So I learned a lot. I learned about going to world markets. I learned how to sell. I learned the commercial side of the business. That you had to sell the rights to France, and you had to sell the rights to Germany, and you had to try to sell the rights to Sweden, and you had to sell the rights, to all the countries of the world separately. So I learned about that, and I was able to do that. And this helped me a lot in the future, because I understood the world market a little bit better than competitors of mine that hadn't gone out and tried to do that. So, Bloodrage became that. Now, occasionally people come to me and say, "Oh, listen, we want to put that out. We want to make a Blu-ray of it, or have some kind of a release of it. Could you, license it to us?" And I always say no. I pass on the opportunity because I don't really identify I don't want to identify with it that way. I don't treat it as, I don't want a fan to think that's my first film that I made as a continuous first film. Now, this is the first time in speaking with you that I'm telling you the story of exactly what it is. So that's why I never put it out there. I know people, it gets out there, people steal it, do something, and it ends up, out there and people can see it. But the truth is, I don't feel that I need people to see it. And I feel the same way about Abduction, which was another opportunity about the same time. And again, you start thinking about, well, what can I make that's going to be commercial, because I want to have an opportunity to make another film, and maybe people will give me another film. So you're making all of these things, these decisions that have to do with what other people would like to see, or maybe they will see, or maybe it'll be successful, or how will you get another opportunity? Will it be because your film made some money, or will it be because your film is really good? with the subject matter that I was working with, I didn't think I could, hit something that critics were going to love. I had to try to make something that was going to work in a different way to give me opportunity. And the truth is, I failed at both. Neither of those things gave me great opportunity for the future. And in fact, well, actually, no. When I made Bloodrage, I made a trailer of Bloodrage that made it look a lot better than it is. Okay. And I made this product reel. And I took this product reel to the Cannes Film Festival, the business section, of course. And I was showing it to buyers and making some sales. And some guy who was an attorney, his name was Carl Kaminsky. He's no longer an attorney or anything else right now, but Carl was a wonderful guy. He saw this trailer and he said, "Let me introduce you to some clients of mine in the film business who I think would love this film because I think it's great." Excuse me. Another shot of this water. So he did. He introduced me to two clients. He introduced me to the guy who ultimately paid for the Prowler. And the second client he introduced me to, this is insane, second guy was the guy who owned the Friday the 13th series, who was a theater owner in Boston, was the actual owner of that series. And he introduced me to him. So as a result, Bloodrage, not even Bloodrage, the trailer that I made to Bloodrage in order to sell it, got me 2 films. Not Bloodrage itself. The trailer got me 2 films. It got me The Prowler and got me Friday the 13th Final Chapter. So this is an amazing, stroke of luck. Believe me, this can never happen again. And I don't think it ever happened before. But that's how it occurred. So yeah, that's Bloodrage and Abduction are finding your footing in a business. I mean, where people like of that time were also experimenting with films that they hope nobody will ever see. And Francis Coppola made a beauty. It was, I think, called Tonight for Sure. About somebody who puts on these glasses and can see through women's clothes. This is how people were struggling to come up with ways to be in the business. And then at a later time, they made the definitive films, of course. And no one could mock, the quality of the work that came out of these guys later. I don't put myself in that class. I was just there at that time, But so struggling in the beginning, yes, to figure out what you want to make and what will keep you in the business or get you in the business. And then finally making things that people see and offer you other things because of that. So that's my Abduction Bloodrage link to both Friday the 13th and the Prowler. Listen, I've always made, if I want to talk about a body of work, starting with the Prowler and, continuing thereafter, I've always made pop culture things, not films really for critics, but things that I thought were engaging in popular culture, for popular culture, And in a crazy way, I make my films a little dreamlike because they're not real. Excuse me. I got some aircon on. It's but if I turn it off, it's because I'm speaking to you from Bangkok and it's pretty hot. Yeah. So I create a kind of dreamlike world if I can, because unrealistic things are going to happen. They're mostly like comic books. So, if Chuck Norris goes off into a fantasy world, whether it's, going to war and killing a lot of people and coming away without a scratch, this is a fantasy. This is not the way it really is. and it doesn't deal with any weighty political issues either. So same thing with Invasion USA. Chuck goes into a dark world. It was like what used to be called New Age comics, but the dark graphic novel kind of a world. But they're fantasies. They're dreamlike. They are comic book like. Red Scorpion. Dolph is undefeatable. I mean, he is. He lifts a car or a truck if he needs to. So these are fantasies. The strange thing about working, shooting Spider-Man, was that I'm starting out with the comic book, and then have to find the grounded reality in that. Actually, in your interview, which I thought was really, really good, and Ted Newsom, the first writer that I met, along with his partner, John Brancato, on Spider-Man, really spoke about that, and remember that I had mentioned that to him. Of course, I didn't remember mentioning it to him, but he remembered in your interview that I had said that Spider-Man was the first time I'm going from comic book to finding the reality in something, when normally I'm taking something which could be real, war and death, and turning it into the comic book version of that, or at least a comic fantasy version of that. When I say comic, I'm not talking about funny. I'm talking about, not unreal. Okay, so look, you do an interesting thing, because I know that I think you're an expert, and I'm not trying to flatter you. I think that you're an expert on screenplays of movies that weren't made. The movie might have been made, but the screenplays specifically were not made. And it's extremely difficult to do what you do, which is try to imagine the movie that would have come from that screenplay. Okay. And I've seen this. This is where you go onto YouTube and they say, this is the terrible movie that never got made, for Spider-Man or something else. Well, come on. It can't be a terrible movie that never got made. It's not a movie yet. It's only a screenplay. And so a very, very smart guy I know, a friend of mine, my best friend, and he's a brilliant, brilliant guy. He's not in show business, which is already a sign that he's smarter than the rest of us. But he's a brilliant guy. And he asked me once, he said, why is it, with all the power and the money of the motion picture business, that some terrible, terrible movies get made? And I think, actually, I didn't know the answer, but having thought about it after, I think that some part of the reason is that it is extremely difficult to imagine the movie you're going to get from looking at a screenplay. Now, I'm not saying the screenplay is not important. The screenplay is the most important thing. And I'm not saying the writer is not important. The writers or writer these are the most important, elements of the project. However, being able to envision specifically what a director is going to do with that screenplay is very, very difficult. So the same screenplay, it's funny. I heard you analyze this with Scott Leva and Ted Newsom, in your interview with them, and they seem to, and you did as well. They seem to have clear views of what the various screenplays of Spider-Man, what movie was going to come out of that. And they look at elements like Doc Ock cartwheels, or he does this or that. I don't think it's possible, because as the director of that script, okay, I never got to direct Spider-Man. Let me not confuse your viewers, but I worked on Spider-Man for over a year. I think between a year and a half, creating, working on the scripts, casting, all the storyboards, all the planning of it, budgeting, everything, traveling around the world to try to set it up in different countries. Okay, so that's my Spider-Man connection in very brief. But, my intention, because I know how, I brought Barney Cohn in to rewrite Ted Newsom and John Brancato's script. And it was not because I didn't like their script. When I first became the the presumed director of Spider-Man. I requested it because I knew that the company, Canon at the time, was going to make Spider-Man. They would place full-page ads in Variety, magazine, newspaper, sometimes 50 pages. Now, keep in mind, this was a time when the independent business was making many more films than the major business, the Paramounts and the Universals and things like that. Independent companies, some of them were making 50 films a year. That's one film a week has to get out. So they would take these huge ads in trade papers, Variety and Hollywood Reporter and Show Business. They would take full-page ads announcing their films so they could raise money in order to make the films. That's how it was done. That's how all of those films, hundreds of films that were made in the 80s, primarily and a little bit in the 90s, that's how they were financed, and that's how they were presented to the business, not the public. Public presumably was not reading those things, but the business. And Canon would take sometimes 40 or 50 pages of ads announcing their films. Now, I had already made Missing in Action for Canon with Chuck Norris, and in a second film with Chuck, Invasion USA, Canon. And I had a multiple picture deal there to make films that I would want to make. I would have to approve them, but films that I would want to make, or films they were making I could ask for. And I saw the ad they took for Spider-Man. It had no director's name in it, which was very peculiar, because usually they had the director or a star or something in the ad. They had no director's name in their full-page ad for Spider-Man at that time. So I went and I ran into Menachem Golan, who was a very extraordinary, colorful character, an amazing force of nature. He was something not to be imagined, but has to be imagined. And I ran into him in the elevator of the building in Canon. And I said, and I have told this story before, sorry to say. And I said to him, Menachem, I want Spider-Man, because there was no director, And he turns to me, he says, you want Spider-Man? I said, yeah, I just said that. I said, I want Spider-Man. He said, I'll let you know in 24 hours. I said, what is this? Because he was not like that. I mean, he would make a decision on the spot, and the next thing it's a movie. He was actually signing contracts on paper napkins, cloth napkins in the Cannes Film Festival. And it was true. He had a napkin in his office framed. No, but it's true. That's what he was like. You'd run into him. What are you doing? What are you doing? Who told you to do this? This kind of stuff. So he said 24 hours. What I did not know was that even though no name appeared as director, they had given it to Tobe Hooper to direct. And so the 24 hours went like this. Tobe was doing another film, and I didn't know Tobe at the time. I met him years later, and I really loved him, and I thought he was great. But I had no idea that I was asking for another director's film. I would never, ever, ever have done that. To my knowledge, there was no director assigned yet, so I wanted to get it before they started thinking about who would be the director. So that's why I asked for it. What I didn't know, Tobe was directing something outside of central Los Angeles.
It's like, I think it was like Invaders from Mars.
It was probably Invaders from Mars. It was Invaders from Mars or Life Force. I don't know which the order of his films exactly. I don't know the chronology. You would know it better than I. And Yoram Globus, Menachem's partner, went out to talk to Tobe and talked him out of Spider-Man. Now, the way the story was told by Ted Newsom, who maybe knows more about this, was slightly different. The story that I heard was that Yoram Globus went out, talked him out of Spider-Man, and came back. And Menachem said to me the next day, "You have your Spider-Man." Never said this thing happened with Tobe. So I had no knowledge that Tobe was had anything to do with this at any point until years later. when I ran into him and we became friendly, and it was great. And I loved him. He was wonderful. So I became the nominal director of Spider-Man. The ads came out with my name on it. The Cannes Film Festival, tremendous advertising, big banners on the front of the Carlton Hotel, which is the hotel you always see the stars come out on the red carpet. They made a tremendous promotion, and I worked on Spider-Man for over a year preparing to make it. So this is how I became the director of Spider-Man, and didn't get to direct Spider-Man because we didn't make it finally. The path to movies can be very strange, and what happens in the course of working on them can be even more strange, and how they get made or don't get made. Those are pretty interesting stories too. At least to the people that's happening, it's happening to. Maybe not to the general public, but and I can tell you why Canon Spider-Man didn't get made at that time.
I remember in the interview, there were like casting choices for Spider-Man. There was Scott Leva, and there was one time that John Brancato's suggestion was Tom Cruise, because it would look like the John Romita look from the comic. And there was Michael Dudikoff, which was based on Menachem's suggestion.
Okay, let me. Yeah, there was a lot said about casting, and let me clarify that. Okay, because let me go back a little bit to Ted Newsom and John Brancato and their script. When I first was made to be the director of Spider-Man, not to be made, but when I was first on Spider-Man, John Brancato and Ted Newsom were already part of the project. Okay, I didn't see. There's a fundamental misunderstanding which I think explains what happened back then. And Ted told the story reasonably well. I mean, Ted was just great. I love Ted. John Brancato and Ted Newsom were writing Spider-Man, Stan Lee's Spider-Man. They knew Stan knew them. They were making Spider-Man. When that project got optioned by Canon for very, very small money, as Ted Newsom said, and he was right, got optioned for very small money. For some reason, Marvel, with whatever problems they were having, allowed a company like Canon to have Spider-Man and Captain America. Ted kind of was philosophical about it, as I understood. He didn't want the film to be made by Canon because they, both Ted and John Brancato, more John than Ted, but probably both of them, thought, oh no, Canon, they make so many bad films, and I think, years later, I got to understand this. And maybe if I talked to John Brancato, today, we'd have an interesting and fun conversation about it. They were protecting Stan's Spider-Man. They were writing the Genesis story from the comic book, exactly what happened. And they had some feelings, I know, about Aunt May, but pretty much they were working on a Spider-Man, and they thought Stan was the king of that. When Canon got the option, they didn't care about Stan Lee at all. First of all, they didn't know who Spider-Man was. They, of course, did not grow up with Spider-Man. And so to them, Spider-Man was, as I've said before, and I hate repeating myself on this, but my feeling was they thought it was like the Wolfman. Wolfman turns into the wolf and goes and chases girls. And I think they thought Spider-Man was kind of like that. He would turn into the spider and then do terrible things. That's all they knew. They didn't read a comic book ever. They didn't sit down and want to talk with Stan. In fact, I pushed Stan to go and meet with Menachem Golan, and I pushed Golan to meet with Stan. okay? Because now I was on the show and I was talking to Stan a lot. And, meeting with him. I went to a party at his house. I would have dinners with him, like that, okay? So I was talking to Stan a lot at the time. So John Brancato thinks, oh, Canon, they make these shitty films. They're all stupid. They're all idiots. I don't want to talk to them at all. Ted Newsom is more philosophical and also more reasonable, saying, look, they're going to make the film. We have to talk to them. We've agreed to show them pages and talk to them. Oh, I don't want their input. Brancato doesn't want. Okay, I understand that, because as a writer, you don't want input. And especially if you identified the people in the company as morons, you certainly don't want them tampering with it. I'm going to make what Stan wants. So they thought they were making Stan's film. Canon thought they were making my film, because I had made 2 films that were popular for them, quite popular for them with Chuck Norris. And they were making Joe Zito's Spider-Man. So, I couldn't actually have any input or any real meaningful conversation. When I first talked to them about it, I was learning who Spider-Man was. That's why Ted Newsom said, well, I was very, I wasn't specific, and I spoke in these platitudes. Yes, because I didn't really know what I wanted in the movie yet. That was the beginning of my term on Spider-Man, where I had to learn who Spider-Man was, had to learn the level of reality and fantasy, what the mix was. So yes, Superman's very clear. He has no moral confusion. Things are good, things are bad. I go after the bad ones and I try to catch them. In a very naive way, hand them over to the police and everything will be fine. But we know the world doesn't work that way. Stan knew the world didn't work that way, and his Spider-Man was grounded in reality, but great fantasy. I mean, after all, let's face it. I was trying to learn who Spider-Man was. Scott was pointing me to the various comics I should read. Of course, I knew who Spider-Man was. I had read Spider-Man comics as a kid, or not as a kid, but somehow, plenty. And I knew who Spider-Man was, but I didn't know the details. You guys were the experts. The fans of Spider-Man, on the level of Newsom and Brancato and you, and millions of others, knew exactly who Spider-Man was. I was learning. Okay, during that year, I was learning who Spider-Man was. So it's a completely different, circumstance. So I was having ideas that, if I listened to them now, I wouldn't like the idea. But then ultimately, I was finding my way to the film that I thought was going to work. Now, I couldn't work. I loved Ted, and I continue to talk to Ted, but I couldn't work with Newsom and Brancato, so I didn't take this. They had a second draft they owed. I didn't take it because we were wasting time. I'll tell you a very it's a speculation, but during the time I was waiting for them to finish their script without being able to give them input, had they not held their script off that long before showing it to me, we might have made Spider-Man. But because I had to wait for them to finish before I could go ahead and actually start to have any input, the process of the film that I wanted to make started later. And during that time, as Ted said, they got the rights to Superman. Because they thought, well, they're making superheroes. We're going to be they envisioned themselves as the Marvel that exists today. Okay, remember that didn't exist then as a film studio. They envisioned themselves as that. So they went and they said, no, we'll do Superman first, because I was preparing to do Spider-Man in England on the beautiful big stages that they had. And Superman will go onto those stages. You can do it on some stages we have in Italy. So I went to Rome. I went to every place. I went to Rome and I set it up in Rome on those stages. And I was meeting with wonderful people. I was meeting with the production designer from Alien. I was meeting with the cinematographers of Fellini. with Giuseppe Rotundo, and great people to bring in to the project. But in the end of the day, Cannon was having financial problems. And I thought the film was going to cost somewhere between $20 and $30 million, which is in today's terms, not quite what you spend on Spider-Man, but at least half as much in today's dollars. They sent it to London to have it budgeted by one of their guys who knew nothing about the film that I was going to make, but they budgeted it at $18 million. I never agreed to 18. I thought it was going to cost more. When I was in Rome, they called me and asked me to come back to Los Angeles to discuss Spider-Man. So I thought, okay, this is it. I'm going to get fired or something. I don't know. But no, they said, we have 15 million for Spider-Man. I said, first of all, you send me a budget for 18. I never said I could do it for 18. With the kinds of effects we had to do, remember, this is before CGI. So you have to practically do everything, build all these sets, perspective or otherwise, arrange all of these physical effects. So he said 15. I said, well, all I can tell you is I'll try. And we went on and continued to work on Spider-Man. And then after quite some time had passed, okay, they called me again, and I'm in the office with Yoram Globus and Menachem Golan. And they say, I have for you 10 millions for your Spider-Man. And I said to them, you know what? This is my feeling about this. I love Spider-Man. And I know that would be the movie that would save the studio. I know it. It's going to be very popular. I believe in it completely. It's going to be wonderful. But 10 million is not enough. You'll make a failure. So my advice to you, as much as it's painful to me, and I swear this is true, okay? I said, my advice to you is don't make Spider-Man. $10 million is a lot of money. You can make 3 movies, 3 movies at least. That could be very good, but you cannot make Spider-Man. So I keep hearing that, oh no, that they decided not to do it. They didn't want. No, they were told they shouldn't do it by me. And it was the right decision. We would have ruined it. If they really owned, they were getting into big trouble with the banks who were lending the money. They were supposed to average their budgets at 5 million maximum. Average their budgets and nothing should break 5 million. So they had a number to average. I don't remember what number, but nothing could break 5 million. They were going to spend 10 anyway. They said, probably cut it down again. So I told them not to do it. So that's the broad strokes of the Spider-Man story. Now, internally, you hear a lot about who was cast and who was not cast and who was going to be Spider-Man and who was not going to be everybody and who had the ideas. I will tell you something. The way I work on film, and I know this sounds, no, you won't believe it, but everybody's having ideas. And you lose track of whose ideas they are. They come from, where they come from. You think it's your idea, and then you remember that, no, the cinematographer suggested that. You think it was the writer's idea, and he says, no, I never thought of it, it was yours. In the end of the day, when you are dealing with something that's being created like that, unless you are like Hitchcock, you see the entire thing in your head. If it is something it's forming, especially like Spider-Man, where everybody involved didn't even know what it was going to be, especially in that case, you don't know where the ideas come from. I always believed that Doc Ock was my choice. When I heard Newsom say, and you say, that Brancato came up with it, or Stan wanted, no, Stan didn't want it, but Brancato came up with it. Yeah, sure. I don't know where I first heard it, but I loved it, and I wanted Ock, only Ock. Never considered anybody but Ock, okay, as the villain. I also, because I had done the Prowler and I had done Friday the 13th, I would have made a scary Ock. And I heard you say that, Aqua's supposed to be scary and Barney's script didn't have him scary because he's doing cartwheels and things. Barney's a very frivolous guy. He's a very good writer, and I've worked with him on many things. But the films that I make of Barney's script are different from Barney's script. Okay? So when he did Friday the 13th, Barney has had young kids at the time, and he was seeing everything through the eyes of what his kids would find fun. And I understood it had to be different, but making Barney write the words wasn't important to me because I knew I would take that script and make the film that I had in mind to make. So Doc Ock would have been scary. And I don't know about the cartwheels because it existed in the script that it was going to be like that or anything else. Okay, we wouldn't have the slightest idea how to do that in those days without CGI. Okay, so anything that sounds like you think you can analyze a script and know what film is going to come from that is extremely, extremely difficult because of the changes that happen or what's in the director's mind. So in picking up my old story that I cut myself off on about this smart guy friend of mine, asking why such terrible movies could be made by Hollywood, it's because everybody sees something different in what they read. And you don't really know the film that was going to be made. Even if you say there's a glaring stupidity in it, you can't be sure of the film you're going to get once it launches and becomes a movie. Now maybe it's different because back then the director ruled. That's not the case anymore. Now the studio rules, everybody has all this input, it's done by committee and accountants. But back then, when they send Tobe Hooper off to make a movie, what comes back is the movie that Tobe Hooper felt like making. Not anything that was on the page, not anything that anybody told him to do. No matter what was said, it becomes the movie that the director wanted to make in the field. Same thing with me. When I did Missing in Action and I did Invasion USA, we did completely different scripts from what started, and that was how it was done. And they see it at the end, and it does business, and they love you, or if it doesn't, they hate you. But there's no conversation about, wait a second, he's supposed to say that, or this was supposed to happen, or that. No, nothing. That's not the case today. So trying to imagine movies that would come out of scripts, even today, is probably extremely difficult, even for the director. If you ask, David Ayer what he thought Suicide Squad was going to be, it's different from the movie that ended up on the screen with his name on it. And if you ask anybody else about any movie, they can tell you that the process is completely formative in the course of making it, where you learn what the film is going to be and it becomes what it is. So yes, I did not dislike Brancato and Newsom's script. I had to deal with the difference between what was brilliant comic book by Stan and others, and what was going to be entertaining to an audience who only had a casual knowledge of who Spider-Man was. They weren't the experts that you and Scott and Ted and John were. So you had to think, well, when you hear fans criticize the Spider-Man productions that have been made, understand that there's an obligation to do something different from only what the fans will love because it's accurate to what the fans understand it to be. Stan was philosophical about this. Stan said, okay, so it'll be a slightly different version of Spider-Man. But the protectors of Stan, Newsom, Brancato, and other great fans of the comic books, wouldn't be as tolerant. And you have to make the decision where you place the film, who you're speaking to, how broadly you're speaking. You're trying to get something that's going to be seen by tens or hundreds of millions of people all over the world. many have no exposure to the character. So, yeah, there's a lot to think about in making such a movie, and you can't always get a clear picture of what it's going to be from looking at some draft of the script.
To ask, like, I heard about, like, there was like a storyboards were done by Harper Goff, what I read somewhere.
Yeah, and most storyboards were done by Mentor Hubner, who was a brilliant artist. But yes, you're right. And so storyboards were brought in by people who had worked on the actual comics. Storyboards, a few different people worked on storyboards. The main storyboards, and in fact, not just storyboards, the entire script was storyboarded. Even sections that in the end, we learned from the storyboards that we weren't going to be able to do them. But everything was storyboarded. Every set was designed. And as Ted said in your interview with him, yes, my office had these huge, versions of this on the walls. Big frames of representing scenes and sets and locations, as well as all of these bound books of everything, the entire film. So we figured out what would have to be done with a perspective set. We were, it appears to be longer or bigger, than it really is, because you can't build a thing, for a mile long, or what would be done, with various types of matte paintings or the procedures that were available at the time. And I talked to the best people who ended up working on Spider-Man, on the Spider-Man movie. But I talked to the best people. This was not going to be in any way, shape, or form anything like any film that Cannon had ever made. It was not going to use any of that personnel. It had nothing to do with the Cannon production. As far as we were concerned in making that production, and the studio agreed with this, that they would not muck it up. So essentially, Cannon was funding Spider-Man at that time. In the end, you can't trust them to keep their word, because that crazy script that you saw with whatever his name, Joseph Goldman, Menachem Golan pseudonym. Somebody once said, this is another thing I'll tell you. They were having scripts written, they were bringing writers in to have scripts written. And I didn't care, because I knew I was going to go to the script that I wanted. They could go through those, they could jump through those hoops. It didn't make any difference. So somebody said to me in the office, one of the creative people in the office said, a terrible thing has happened. I said, what's that? They said, Menachem Golan got on a plane with the script of Spider-Man. And by the time he got off the plane, you don't want to see what he did. So he crossed, because, he was always, he was the best, I have to tell you. But great fun to be around, but crazy, beautifully crazy. But so what he does is he takes something, he wants to make sure that somebody who doesn't speak the language at all, because he's thinking about himself, first of all, in the early days, and then he's thinking about the audiences that he sells to who are not speaking the language of the movie, and he's not trusting them to understand it. So he makes sure everything is very, very clear. So instead of something that was subtle and, layered, he wants the character to say, I am going to be sure to kill you because of, this kind of thing. So everything becomes obvious and ugly and clunky. And as the creative person who told me about this, they have a knack of, fucking with the heart of it as soon as they get to it. They go right to what makes it work and screw that up. So anyway, yeah, he did have that. But I knew he was not attached to these things. If I went and said to him, Menachem, listen, this is nonsense. I know what to do here. Okay, please forget this stuff that you wrote. He would have said, okay. People don't know that, because if they trusted you, I'll tell you something that's not known about Cannon. They would screw with everything. They would make actors' lives miserable, directors' lives miserable. They wouldn't pay. All these things were true. Okay? All these things were true. Productions would have to shut down. There would be no this. However, if they believed in you, you had a perfect experience. And there were very few people who got into that category. When they made a deal with John Cassavetes, they believed in him. Visconti, they believed in him. Okay? A few people. Toby, I don't know if they believed in or were afraid of, but somehow they left him alone. They left me alone. Okay? They would never, see dailies and come yelling and stuff like, no. In fact, they never saw any dailies on Missing in Action at all, not a frame until it was finished. Okay? So, and the money flowed and what you needed. In fact, when I was doing Invasion, I got a phone call. And in those days, you weren't carrying a phone in your pocket. They didn't exist. So I got a phone call on the set of Invasion. And I had shot, 60% of it by that time, maybe more. And yeah. So for Invasion, they were seeing dailies occasionally back in California. I was moving around. We shot a lot in Florida and in Georgia. So I was on location. And so some guy said, you have a phone call. I said, okay, well, I'm on the set, middle of directing a scene. They said, no, you have to come. It's Menachem Golan. He wants to talk with you. So I said, oh, okay. So you have to get in the car and you drive a long distance to a phone booth. The phone is hanging in the phone booth. And I pick it up and it's Menachem. And I think, okay, if he needs to take me off the set and lose time and money to go talk to him on the telephone, for sure I'm going to get fired, right? So I pick up the phone and I talk to him. And he says, I saw your dailies. So I wait. I say, yeah. He said, they are great. He says, I have for you 3 million more. So he raises the budget by $3 million on a phone call because he saw something he likes. He says, I want you to make something with children if they're scared. I said, okay, I know what to do. Never told me details of any scene, never wrote anything, no Joseph Goldman crap. That was it. And I did something that's in the movie. And so that's how it worked. So from my history with them, having made 2 movies already and having a multiple picture deal to make more, I knew they were going to let me make the Spider-Man that I believed in because that's how they dealt with me in the past. I wasn't afraid of other scripts. I wasn't afraid of Menachem's notes. I'll call them or rewrite if you like. Because I knew they were trusting the very few people, Andrei Konchalovsky, who did Runaway Train, very few people got trusted like that. And those people never had a problem of any kind, either personally dealing with them, financially dealing with them, or the movies. And they didn't recut the movies and have crazy ideas. They took the movie you gave them and put it on the screen. So again, all of the terrible things that were said about them, true. Absolutely true. And what I'm telling you is a wonderful thing, and I have no reason to say it. It doesn't exist anymore. Menachem himself doesn't exist, but I'm telling you that that's how it was. And so that factors into the analysis of the scripts of Spider-Man, that I knew at the end of the day, they would support the director.
Was there any other cast? Well, there was, of course, there was a Bob Hoskins and Doc Ock.
Okay, let me go back to that because that was your question, and then I went on forever on other things. There was no set cast for Spider-Man. None. Not one person. I cast, brought people in, read them, ran them through scenes for every character, and there was a target list of people we wanted. Stan was very much in favor of Scott Leva. Okay? Stan was very much in favor of Scott Leva for Spider-Man. We never cast Spider-Man. I did not know if the studio was going to go for someone major. I thought Tom Cruise at the time was a great idea, but they would not succeed. Okay? Bob Hoskins, I thought was my idea. Now, someone in your show said that it was maybe John's idea or something. I'm positive Bob Hoskins was my idea. But again, the recollection could be muddy on this, but I don't think so. I thought Bob Hoskins would be perfect as Ock. I wanted Ock. I had ideas about Aunt May, a few different characters. There were 2 or 3 possible Aunt Mays. There was a wonderful, wonderful character actor that I wanted for Uncle Ben. Stan was dying to play, Jameson. I mean, Stan, every time I saw him, it was the same thing. He's auditioning. Oh, yeah, I wanted to tell you something else about Stan, but I'll be interrupting myself again. He wanted to be part of the production, and the company did not want him to. And even his agent called me, said, look, it's not going to be a money thing. He just wants to be part of it. And I thought it was great. And so I kept meeting with him, but he was not active in the production. He was not, running anything. He would make suggestions to me. And Scott was one thing he harped on, and he was the #1 casting that he harped on, nobody else, having him be in the movie as that. No, I didn't think it was a good idea. I didn't think Stan was, strong enough to really carry that character. And I think they did it brilliantly by having an actor look like Stan, play it. And I think that was a stroke of genius. But no, there was no actual casting. So all of these rumored names, they were on lists along with many other names. But there was nothing set for any of them. There were some really good ideas on those lists, and you've talked about some of them, But whether or not they would be attainable, whether the person could be gotten or the company would be willing or able to pay them the price, because there was never an actual start date. We were working on something, waiting to know when we could start to shoot. And had there been a start date, we would have gone out and shot the next day, as soon as they fixed the cast.
Okay. Yeah. When reading the script, and I would read about Adolf Caesar as Murata, and I thought this could be interesting. And because I think days ago watched A Soldier's Story for the first time, and he really made really brilliant on screen.
He's brilliant. He was also, we were talking about a lot of guys who sadly are not with us, but he was brilliant all the time. I had worked with him a lot, but not on screen. Because as I told you, when I had my editorial service, he was one of the most popular voiceover characters you'd bring in for TV spots, commercials, trailers, things like that. So I worked with him a lot, and I loved him, and he was a really good guy. So yes, would have been wonderful to have him, and wonderful. I can tell you only the of everyone. Tom Cruise, the fantasy casting, Bob Hoskins, the possible casting, and Adolf Caesar, yes. Everybody else they were on lists of maybes. There was a potential list for every character, and some were put on by me, and most were put on by others. The final call would have happened like this. This is how it would work. Because on my other films, I was able to cast every part except for one. Okay? But I would pick, and that person would be in the film. The only part that I didn't cast in the past on Invasion USA, they had a deal with Richard Lynch, and they didn't make the film, and they owed him the money because of the nature of the way contracting is. In Hollywood, you owe the money even if you don't make the movie, sometimes. So they didn't make it, and they said to me, we have to use him because we owe him the money, and we're going to have to pay him. So we want to use him to play the villain, Rostov, in Invasion USA. And I knew Lynch was a terrific actor. I mean, he was a great actor, and he did a great, great job as Rostov, but he is not the guy I would have cast. So that's the only time in all the parts, that I didn't just cast it and that was it. I didn't even have to run it past them to say, this is who it is, it's my choice, show them pictures, nothing. We cast them, they go in the movie. So I know in the end of the day, I might not have my way completely, but I knew it was going to be a conversation between me and the chairman of the company, and it would get decided like that. And no, that's as far as it went. And there were lists for everyone. Probably at least 3 names on each list.
And I was thinking of asking for Invasion. I read this at some point that Whoopi Goldberg was suggested for the reporter role.
That's funny. Chuck Norris knew Whoopi Goldberg. And the way he knew Whoopi Goldberg, in some early movie that he made, Whoopi Goldberg was an extra. Okay? She was an extra. She was a young girl. I know it's hard for you to imagine that today, but Whoopi Goldberg was a young, kind of attractive, woman, and Chuck knew her, and they just became friends. And it's understandable. I mean, how they could become friends. So Chuck came to me and said, I want you to go see this show. There's somebody I know, and she's doing a one-woman show on Broadway. And this is what we were working on Invasion. He didn't say anything. He said, he told me her name, and he gave me her phone number. And he said, go see the show, call and ask her for tickets. She was completely unknown at that time. She was just starting in the business, okay? She'd been an extra on Chuck Norris's film, and she was doing this one-person show where she played a lot of different characters. And my assistant then took the number and called Whoopi Goldberg's, called the number. It was Whoopi Goldberg's mother. She ended up talking to Whoopi Goldberg's mother and then finally talking to Whoopi Goldberg herself and saying, Chuck would like to get tickets for me, for Zito. And, it was like the last thing Whoopi Goldberg ever expected to hear from Chuck Norris trying to get tickets to the show. Why don't I just buy the tickets, right? But no, tried to get tickets to the show. So yeah, they arranged the tickets and I went to see the show and she was spectacular. She was great in the show. She played all these different characters. She was wonderful. She was magic back then, maybe not just back then, but she was magic. So I saw her in the thing. I thought she was great. Never really went beyond that. There was never a serious. He might have made that suggestion. He didn't make the suggestion to me that she play the role. He probably made the suggestion to Golan, Menachem Golan or something, and I never heard about it. So it died somehow up there. But it never came to me. I never heard that she was considered for anything. But Chuck was probably afraid to, to bring it to me. So he probably brought it, to the chairman and said, "Oh, this is really good." And they didn't pay it. They didn't even mention it to me.
On a trivia fact.
Okay, so what trivia fact was it? It was that. It was that, but I think it said that you disagreed. I was like, never heard of it.
I was like, that's okay, listen, weird.
Here's the thing. I want to make this clear to you and anybody else who cares to know. I always speak completely, accurately as best I can remember the stories when I speak to anybody. I don't go do a lot of things, I don't go and do the conventions a lot. Once in a while I'll do them. Like I don't charge for signings. I sign anything. I don't care. I don't, I'm not like trying to make an industry of that and make up clever stories. Everything I tell you is exactly as I remember it, and not just to you, but in general. Because if fans want to ask a question about something, they deserve to hear the real story. I have nothing to sell here. These are movies that have already been sold. Okay. So, you know, that's the thing. Nobody ever talked to me about Whoopi Goldberg. The story I told you is true. I went to see the show. I thought she was great. And that was the last I heard Whoopi Goldberg's name with that project. So about her being liked or not liked, frankly, I think she would have been a great idea for it, but it never came to me. It didn't occur to me. I didn't think about it. I didn't think that was in Chuck's mind, you know? And I hear this a lot, you know, the guy, Ted White, who played Jason, says he came to me on behalf of, you know, an actress who was, you know, I don't know, she was too cold in the lake. Ted came to me about he was too cold in the lake. Okay. He might have talked to somebody else about an actress.
Jeez.
The stories that go over it, and believe me, Scott Leva's recollection of what occurred during Spider-Man, he was being as sincere as he could be. And you know, same thing with Ted Newsom when you talk with him, being as truthful as he can be. These guys are not making stuff up. And I'm telling you truthfully what the reality is as I recall it. Okay? Now, I mean, that's why there are, you know, court cases when witnesses disagree, but there's no objective here, you know? So not just with Whoopi Goldberg, but with all of it, with the Cannon story and with the Spider-Man story. Those are the things that actually happen. And a lot of stuff that I see on the internet, I have to smile about because I know it's somebody's fantasy, not even a recollection because they weren't there, you know. But sure, that's just the nature of, it's the nature of the world we live in now, where everybody has a chance to say what it is they think their reality is, or what they would like it to be.
I don't want to upset you or anything, but asking this
I don't
question.
upset you. I don't upset you easily.
Is there anything you have kept with Spider-Man, like scripts and stuff, storyboards, whatever comes to its mind?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen it since the time, but when we closed up and we were not going to do Spider-Man, it wasn't like the company was going to go off and do it themselves or with somebody else. That was the end of Spider-Man as far as everybody in the business. Everybody knew, and I knew. So I closed up the office, and I always kept the versions of the scripts that I had and any of the work. I'm sure I have all of it. I put stuff in storage when I close up the production, usually after we've done it, not when we haven't done it. But this is the rare case where there was a tremendous amount of work done on something that we didn't do. But sure, I have it all. I had all that stuff in storage. I haven't seen it. Let's do the math on this. I haven't seen it in 30-something years, right? Because we're talking about something that occurred in the 80s. So, you know, yeah, if the rats haven't eaten it.
And I was curious to ask, I mean, I always would love to read any more Spider-Man scripts, because the last recent one I read was the one done by Shepard Goldman and Albert Pyun.
Oh yeah, that's right. They resurrected it there. Yeah.
And yeah, I did read that. Actually, it was sent to me by a friend. And I read that, and they're like, because this is like, because I can assume to consume that, I assume that this was where there were scenes like deleted. I was like, this makes me assume that Canon was still like having trouble, financial trouble, like trying to spend money on Spider-Man.
Well, look, I mean, that was a long time after Spider-Man was dead, actually, and well, maybe it wasn't that long, but it was quite some time. Spider-Man was dead, and then they, at some point, had this idea, I guess, to make it very cheap. They had a property. They thought the property was valuable. Some people would come in. Let's make a really low budget one because we don't have any money, but at least we can sell it because it is Spider-Man. So I guess they had that idea. I never heard about it until way after. And of course, I never saw a script on it. Albert was very inventive with his movies. There was some of them were really strange. I haven't seen many, but they were like really odd. They had a strange mood to it, very hypnotic. There's things I liked a lot in some of his movies, but and he was able to do things with no money and really fast, and he was, miraculous that way. But what Spider-Man he might have made, I have no idea, and what they had in mind. And once again, I also think Albert was a guy I'm pretty sure they would leave alone because they couldn't figure out his movies. They were so peculiar. They were like unique expressions of his view of things. So my guess, though I have zero knowledge on this, so let's not turn this into a IMDb, trivia piece, because I don't know what I'm talking about. But my guess is that it would have been the Albert movie, not Canon or Stan or a Marvel or anything movie. Would be my guess. So whatever appeared in that script, I have no idea how closely Albert worked to the scripts that he worked with. I get the sense that he was very inventive, but I don't know that for sure. Maybe he did every word. Yeah, there was to be such a thing that was planned. They also asked me at one point if I wanted to do Captain America back actually around the Spider-Man time, but I didn't. And you're very good at this. I've seen this in listening to you on the previous podcast, with Ted, and in our conversations, our conversation. Yeah, you can be very, very accurately analytical about these things. And but again, keep in mind, if you're looking at a final film, yes, once you make a film, everybody has a right to interpret it as they see fit. Scripts, yes, you can review scripts, but you don't know movies from scripts. You can't know the movie exactly from the script. So it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder. Even, as I was saying about Barney with the Spider-Man script and his Friday the 13th draft, he would be a lot lighter in the way he would describe these things. A lot lighter, and it would be more. It would seem like it's more fun. So the things I wanted to be fun, worked great with Barney's words specifically, and things I wanted to be scarier. There's no problem in making them scarier or different. So, that's how movies. That's how they're different from scripts sometimes. I don't think the Barney script was that different from Brancato Newsom, but it was different, and it was different in an attempt to make it to reach a much broader fan base than the literal Genesis story. And so of course, people who just only wanted the Genesis story exactly like the comic book would bristle at that. But Barney's was an attempt to move into a more commercial area, which has been pretty much how I've directed the body of my work, to try to move things into an area where a larger number of people are going to be able to experience it and hopefully appreciate it. Maybe not making the film that I would go see, but making the film that I would hope other people might go see and enjoy, and it would work for them. And films that are made only for business or only with an objective, that's why I dismiss the early films for me. Films that are made where you think there's a chance to entertain fans of this type of movie, and I hope they're going to like it, and I'm trying to make them like something they would like. That's, to me, worth having out there. And things that are constructed for other reasons, whether it's producer's director's ego or business only or whatever the circumstance is, they really don't merit the audience's attention.
Asking this because about Missing in Action is there was a point where when I got to there was there was a scene where James Hong
Yes.
is like is holding it at the press conference, and he's speaking in Vietnamese, and at that point I thought this was like kind of like, I was like, I don't want to insult, but I thought it was a I thought it was, I was thinking like, is James Hong speaking the like a really rough but thick Vietnamese, kind of flat in a way?
Yeah. Okay. So
I don't want to insult anything or offend.
no, it doesn't insult. It doesn't insult me or anybody who made the film. It's insulting to Vietnamese, I think, but it doesn't insult. It doesn't insult us, in making the film. Here's what happened. James Hong is another terrific, terrific character. When I saw Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner, there were great, great character actors in it. James Hong, of course. Almost Brian James,
Yeah, Ed Walsh.
yeah, Emmett Walsh. And I had tried, I was so impressed by what they did, the idea that this is the kind of, crap person that would be left behind when everybody else left. So they used these, it was genius, really is great, he's genius. So he used these character actors, like the world would only be filled with these kind of character actor types, right? Because they were all of them so sleazy and, in different ways, but not James Hong in that movie. So I try to work with all of them, and I worked with most of them in different movies. So yes, we brought James Hong for Missing in Action, playing a Vietnamese. And of course, the script was in English. And James Hong, this is so stupid of me, but I have to laugh at myself. Why not? Other people do, so I may as well. So I wanted the character to speak Vietnamese. And, I often use languages in my films because I want the lead character to not quite understand what's happening around him. So if Dolph goes off to Africa, he doesn't know what anybody's saying. If somebody goes off to, they're alone. They're out of the culture that they understand. They're not surrounded by language they understand. It makes it more threatening for the audience too. So, to be in that situation. In the case of James Hong, it was very simple. I wanted the character not to speak in English. I wanted him to speak in Vietnamese. But James Hong does not speak Vietnamese, of course. I don't even know how good his Chinese is. But, but he doesn't speak in Vietnamese. So we had, of course, Vietnamese translators on the film and, advisors, because we were not shooting in Vietnam, of course. We were shooting in the Philippines, around the same areas that Apocalypse Now, had shot. So somebody wrote out in Vietnamese, but anglicized it Vietnamese, so someone who speaks English could say the words on big cards. And I told James, because he was freaked. I knew James, if I said you have to speak Vietnamese, he would try to learn, Vietnamese, and he would not succeed because we only had him a few days. So I told him, yeah, James, you're gonna do it in Vietnamese. He said, oh no, please. I said, no, yes, we're gonna do it in Vietnamese. He said, but I don't speak Vietnamese. I said, it's okay, just do your best with this. Because the thinking, I'm sorry to say, and this is offensive, but I'll say it anyway, was that this was not a marketplace that everybody was very worried about. Okay, I just wanted to create the performance, the best performance I could. So James read it off of cards, not really speaking the language. I knew that someone who actually spoke Vietnamese would know this is nonsense. But it was a decision that was made because I thought overall it helped the film. So I'm glad he spoke Vietnamese in it. I wish he really spoke Vietnamese in it, but he doesn't. And that's why it sounds like that, because James does not speak Vietnamese. And he was reading it off a card.
Yeah, it's just I really want to ask about that one.
No, it's a story of stupidity, not embarrassment, really. You don't always have to be embarrassed by everything stupid you do. You only have to have the ability to admit it.
And actually got this actually I talked to a friend because I was gonna interview because I was interviewing you. A friend asked me if I can ask you this question, is that somewhere on the Invasion USA Blu-ray commentary, which I actually haven't listened to because the only media I had of Invasion USA is the DVD from MGM. Um,
Yeah.
but on the commentary you mentioned about like there was like an alternate draft that was like big budget in a way.
I don't know what I said on actually, I've never heard the commentary. I did the commentary, but I never heard the edit, and I never actually listened to myself on these things. So I'm not sure exactly what your friend's referring to, but there was another draft of well, there was another draft of Missing in Action. Um, Tell me what your friend said specifically. He heard there was another.
There was like a there was like a version of the script that was like that was like big budget in a way. I can't remember
No,
what was it.
no, no. There was never any other version of the script. In fact, there was only one version of the script. There was no script. It was just a story idea. The way Invasion got made was that after Missing in Action, the company asked me to do more films, and they wanted me to do films with Chuck because, we presented Chuck in a different way than he had been presented before, because he was in martial arts stuff all the time. And I decided that it would be better not to make just a martial arts movie because, they were playing on the martial arts areas of cities, but they weren't really broadly popular. And I thought, well, okay, maybe we can make Chuck, a real general release, well-known household word hero. And the way to do that is to give him a gun instead of, just martial arts stuff. I didn't know anything about martial arts, of course, and I didn't think, and I was trying to just have him enter the action audience, which Clint Eastwood was in at the time. And so we made an action film with him as if he were not a martial arts star, but just a guy starring in an action movie. And we created this new persona for him. Okay. After making Missing in Action, and we were very lucky, it was a success. It shocked people. It opened #1 in the country, beating big films. It was a big deal. So because of that, Cannon wanted to do another film with me and Chuck together to try to keep creating this new Chuck character, because he was known only in the martial arts films he had done before. And we were creating the Chuck of the memes, the Chuck you see in memes, we were creating that guy. I didn't tell Chuck I was going to create that guy of him, but I decided to do it. And Chuck was very, very willing, military kind of guy. You're the general and I'm the soldier, and so it worked fine. But the script, Chuck had an idea for Invasion that he pitched to everybody. He pitched to Menachem Golan and Yoram Globus. He also pitched it to me. And his idea was that Russians had trained people all over the United States pretending to be Americans in the culture and waiting for a signal to rise up in a revolution against America. This was during the Cold War kind of mentality that this could happen. So there was kind of like an army out there of people pretending to be suburban families or whatever that were really waiting for the signal to take up arms against the country, the United States. That's an idea Chuck had. They at Canon never cared a lot about any of these ideas. They said, okay, fine, Invasion, we're going to make Invasion. And I wanted it to be called just Invasion. Menachem, because he has the Joseph Goldman, puts USA on it, thinking of the world market. Like, okay, Invasion USA, what can we do? So it was Invasion USA. And it's kind of crazy. It's kind of weird that in the poster for Invasion USA,
Yep.
that film is done, what, 1985, 1986, right? It shows terrorists invading America. You might remember 9/11. It shows terrorists invading America. It shows the World Trade Center towers on the right. It shows the Capitol building on the left. The targets, it shows the targets of 9/11 inside this poster. And the army's on the street. You know, so the targets of 9/11, the Capitol building was one of the targets. Of course, the World Trade Center was one of the targets. The American military was one of the targets, the Pentagon. So it had all of these elements, and it was done, you know, 16 years or so, 15, 16 years, 17 years before the actual terrorist invasion of America. You know, the catch line was America wasn't ready, but he was. You know, this one guy, it's like a Western, you know, one guy defends the town against the bad guys who come in. So it's a weird thing. In fact, you know, they took the poster as part of the 9/11 museum in New York, because it showed, you know, those things I just talked to you about. It had the Twin Towers and it had the elements of the terrorist event, the real terrorist event that happened later. Anyhow, yeah, one of the lines on the poster is that's something like, "No one thought it could ever happen here." Well, of course it did, you know, but
It's actually a line in the trailer. I remember.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's before, you know, anything. So it was like this crazy thing of foreseeing the targets. Anyway, Chuck had that idea of Soviet kind of, you know, times of Russians being waiting for the thing. We never made that. It never existed as a script. It was an original idea. There was no script ever. The script got done by James Bruner. I went around the country with James Bruner, and we would pick locations. We'd go to Florida, and we'd look at something and say, okay, let's do a scene about that. We'd go back to the hotel and create that scene. And what about this? What about a church? What about, you know, an abandoned carousel? What about, you know, and all those scenes were invented in the field by going around Florida and Georgia. You know, I was looking for locations in Georgia. I met with the film commission. They said, there's a shopping mall that's closed and they're going to renovate it. You could possibly shoot there. So we put a shopping mall in. And of course I had to meet, this was probably all this would have been on my commentary. But I had to get the money to put all the stuff in the shopping mall, you know, to fill it with things. So it was a free location, but we had to spend $250,000 on turning it into a shopping mall full of things. Anyway, the script, there is no alternate version. That's the most expensive version of the script that ever existed, the only version of the script that ever existed. And it was written, we went out and we shot it as that. So for your friend, one script.
Yeah, actually, I just only have that.
Two scripts to Missing in Action. He might be confusing two different things.
Okay, I mean, I think I do have like a 1983 draft of Missing in Action, which didn't have the brought-up character. It had a character named Matt Hunter, I think.
Well, yeah, well, that's right. Missing in Action is another more complex story, because there was a whole film made before Missing in Action called Missing in Action. You probably know that.
Yeah, it was Lance Hull's version. Right. It was actually, this was interesting, was that was it filmed like simultaneously?
No. It was edited simultaneously, but not edited simultaneously, but not filmed simultaneously. Okay. Lance Hull was the producer of Missing in Action and had brought it to Cannon, and Cannon agreed also to make him the director of Missing in Action. And Lance went, and there was a script, okay? And they hired a crew, and they went to shoot it in St. Kitts, and they made the movie. They shot the movie, complete movie, right? I hadn't seen any of this because it was being shot. I was making and releasing, well, making and then immediately was released Friday the 13th, final chapter. Okay. When Friday the 13th, final chapter opened, it was a gigantic box office opening, broke all kinds of records every place. So immediately, Cannon found me on the weekend after, okay, that it opened. Cannon found me, again, it was a thing. And Cannon found me, and they said, would you like to do a movie? And, that's pretty thrilling. I'm starting out in my career, kind of, and people calling you, asking you to do movies immediately is a big deal. And I said, yeah. And they said, what about Missing in Action? Actually, Missing in Action 2. They said, we made a film, Missing in Action. Would you like to do Missing in Action 2? I said, well, I had just done a sequel. I was trying to make it, the best I could. And I was very interested in the Missing in Action subject because I had actually been working on a treatment myself of Missing in Action idea. So I said, okay, let's see. And they said, yeah, we're going to shoot it in Florida. And I said, no. If you want to do Missing in Action, we have to go to Asia. So they said, no, Florida it's the same thing. It looks the same. I said, it doesn't look the same. What are you talking about? He says, we have to go to Asia. So they said, well, what about the Philippines? Apocalypse Now was done in the Philippines. Can we go to the Philippines? And they allowed me to go to the Philippines to see if I could set it up in the Philippines. And I did. And Lance came with me. Lance was to be the producer and I was to be the director, Missing in Action 2. And Lance came with me. He did some stuff. I don't know what he was doing exactly. He wasn't with me very much. I met with everyone and saw that I could do it. I say, this person will cast, this crew will be there. I met everybody I needed to meet, actors, And I came back and I said, yeah, I can do it in the Philippines. So then we created the Missing in Action 2 script, okay? And Chuck had a bunch of ideas in a script. And we went out to do, Missing in Action was already shot in St. Kitts. We went out to the Philippines. In the Philippines, while we were prepping, we were rewriting the script. So there was the original version that Chuck had, and then there was the version that was rewritten. So there were 2 versions of that script. We shot the rewritten version, not Chuck's original version. And this was always a lot of tension on the set about this because he liked the things that were in the original version. I didn't. I liked the things that were in the version we shot. And we shot the version that I liked. Okay. When we finished, both films, Lance's film was still in editing. My film, which was supposed to be Missing in Action 2, was in editing. When the company looked at both rough cuts, Menachem came to me and said, your film is better. I'm sorry, Lance, this is a story that actually happened like this. It says, your film is better, but you can never edit it in time. We have to let the other one be Missing in Action. Because they were thinking now, because they were liking my film, that they would change it and make my film Missing in Action and make the one Lance directed Missing in Action 2, even though it was done first. Got it?
Yeah.
A little complicated, kind of. So even though I was the second production to go, they wanted to make it the first to be released. I said, I can hit this. I had an editorial service. I bring my people, no Canon people. I bring my own people who worked for me before. Friday the 13th, Prowler. I bring my editors. We can cut it, and we can hit a deadline. And they went back and forth. I was cutting, Lance was finishing. Maybe it'll go one way, maybe it'll go the other. At the end of the day, they made the decision to make my film, Missing in Action, open it first. Take Lance's film, which was shot first, and open it second, and make it Missing in Action Part 2, the beginning. So there were, in fact, 2 scripts to the one I made and Lance's film, which was separate, but they got reduced into the one thing that I made with a Missing in Action script that I liked.
Okay.
That's how that happened. So maybe your friend was thinking about that 2-script story. No 2 scripts on Invasion. Invasion was very expensive. It was no more expensive. It was impossible to make a more expensive film. Invasion was an extremely expensive film at that time. It was a very big production.
I remember I only had I had like a scanned PDF of only one Invasion script with revisions on it. And
nobody ever rewrote the script that we did.
I mean,
they might have rewritten it, but nobody ever gave it to us. We shot the script that Bruno did.
Okay. I just saw revision pages.
You can get confused by drafts because sometimes companies are guessing at things, bringing in silent writers, all of this stuff. But you got to look at the production itself. If I'm out making a movie and I'm given only one script, and then I shoot that script, it doesn't matter what other fantasies people came up with. I wasn't shown any other script ever on Invasion. So yes, I don't doubt that these things happen, and then they show up later, and they become part of the legend. But yeah, it's not how it went.
Okay. And thank you for answering my first questions.
Well, yeah, whatever it was, whatever your question was.
Yeah.
Sure. By the way, if you find out his question was something different, communicate with me and I'll answer the other question.
I think that was just that question. It was just like if there was any other draft of Invasion, but you answered it.
We didn't talk about Red Scorpion very much, but yeah.
Yeah, that, gosh, I think when it got to the torture scene, I pretty much grimaced, just covering my face a bit.
The torture of Dolph and Red Scorpion.
Yeah, there was the actor who tortures Dolph was also in Invasion USA.
Yes, Alex
gets a knife onto his hand.
Yes, I know. I plagiarized myself with the corkscrew. Remember the corkscrew in Crispin Glover's in Friday the 13th Final Chapter, and then put the knife in Alex's hand, Alex Cologne, in Invasion. See, this was a tougher. Okay, here's something about that. Chuck was always concerned, because he started making movies in the 70s, I guess, and was trying to always be sure to present himself as a good guy, a moral guy. He was, remember, in the time of Superman, not in the time of Spider-Man. So he was, a moral guy, totally moral. And I wanted to make him a little grittier. So in Invasion, when he wants information from someone, he kills him sometimes. Yes, there's 2 guys on the ground. He asks the question. The first one, guy doesn't tell him, he shoots him. And then he asks the question of somebody else. It's like, whoa, this is not the Chuck, of previous movies where he wanted to always be the good guy, and be pristine. He puts a knife through the hand of the guy. He becomes motivated by, first of all, it's a darker film, it's a dark world, and it's expediency. This is how we're going to find out. And he's willing to do what's necessary to do. He becomes a tougher guy. He becomes the meme. He becomes a tougher guy. Not just, a good guy who's always, even when he was crashing the truck into the shopping mall in Invasion USA. Invasion USA, we take a truck, crash through the doors of a shopping mall, and people are scattering. And like Chuck said to me, he said, yeah, but I mean, I wouldn't do that. I said, why not? He said, well, you know, there's people who are in the way, maybe I would hit somebody. I said, no, you're stopping a terrorist attack inside a shopping mall. You go. Okay? You trust yourself to miss him? If you didn't, well, you didn't. And he did it. Chuck's a very obedient actor back then. I don't know how he would be in current day. But then, you know, when you said that this is how it was, he considered you the, you know, the boss. So we did that and we recrafted him. And that's what I think turned him into that character that's infallible, that's tough, that is the meme that you see everywhere, you know, as opposed to a good guy that he was always playing, who had no moral contradictions. You know, this was the beauty of Spider-Man. Spider-Man was so conflicted. I mean, he had so many things that he couldn't work out in his personal life. He couldn't, you know, with a girl and with his family, and yet he's Spider-Man. He has to save the world, and he has to still worry about these things. I mean, you know, and this was Stan as a person. As I knew him, you know, I don't profess to be somebody who hung around with Stan and knew him perfectly all the time, but I had plenty of encounters with him, you know, and Stan was this guy who also could get very angry. Stan was the Hulk. I mean, he could be someone who turned into, Stan could be, you know, extremely angry at things, small things, tiny things. Stan imagined himself turning into, and you'd see him become that and then come back and be Stan again, you know? And even with Spider-Man, when I was trying to learn about Spider-Man, okay, you'll think this story is crazy. I was invited to a party at Stan's house. And there were not that many people, maybe 30 people at the party. Stan, you know, his wife, Joni at the time, and a bunch of people from, I think Bob Gale was there, some writers, and a lot of the original Marvel people. Now, because I was just learning about Spider-Man, unlike you, if you went to such a party, you would have known everybody and who they were. I had no idea who anybody was. Okay, I didn't know these guys, who these iconic original guys from the Marvel stuff, you know? So I talked to one of them and I said, look, I'm trying to learn. And the guy came over me and he said, yeah, I know you're directing Spider-Man. I said, yeah, I'm trying to really learn, you know, who is Spider-Man? I said that. And the guy, who probably is somebody really famous, and if I could tell you his name, it would make a much better story, but I don't know. The guy, he was Stan's age, you know, the guy pointed across the room at Stan and he said, that's Spider-Man. That's Spider-Man. Okay. And it's true, because Stan was this guy who, you know, Stan was a nerd who with a great imagination and great fantasy, wanting to be something of that. And Stan was that guy. He had all those insecurities. He had all of those things, you know, but he had the magic of imagination. And the hard thing about making any Spider-Man movie was balancing the reality of that kind of introverted character. You know, it's not just Clark Kent who, you know, puts on and takes off glasses. You know, this guy's got neurotic problems, and yet he has to put himself aside and try to become what he has the power to be now. And yet he still has those problems trailing and, you know, mixing together. So figuring out the balance of those things is the hard part about making a Spider-Man movie, and figuring out the tone where you have to have reality. And the guy's walking on real streets in New York, you know, and it's not like a fake fantasy city. It's not Gotham. It's a real place and real things and, you know, things you recognize. and subway stops, and then the next thing, all of this other fantasy is happening. How to make those two separate emotional worlds exist inside the same product is extremely difficult. And you can't really see that on the page. This is in the great imagination of the guys who have made the good Spider-Man movies. And many people have come to me and said, you must be so upset that you didn't get to direct Spider-Man. And I said, no, not at all. First of all, the experience of being part of the event of the creation of Spider-Man was terrific. It was a wonderful experience. And you remember the story I told, that I was the one who said, don't make it finally. It was a financial reality. It wasn't that they all of a sudden said, oh, we don't like script to you or this and that. No, they didn't have the money at the time, and they would have made the wrong film. And I didn't want to make the wrong film and ruin that property for people who could enjoy it. So I'm so thrilled that the films have, worked as they have and turned into what they did. I'm not responsible for it, but I'm responsible for not screwing it up beforehand, because the circumstance was not right, being able to make the film I would have liked to make. I believe had we made the script we had prior to Joseph Goldman, had we made the script we had in the way that we would have made it, it would have been a really good film. So I'm sorry we didn't get to do that, but it's not the same thing. We didn't get to do that by circumstance and by my own choice.